and today we're going over Arms Warrior. I announced in my last video about marksmanship that I would have gone over a pretty quick melee DPS spec to go over because there isn't really too much to talk about, so let's go over Arms. Arms, for years now as a spec, has kept this cliche, or this niche, however you want to see it, of very slow but hard-hitting juggernaut. Low APM, low clicks and low buttons, but hits very hard type of deal, right? To me, I always seen this as some sort of coping mechanism for the spec being shit in the way it plays. Blizzard has never quite been able to actually make this style work properly. There has always had to be something coming in the middle of the expansion to bail the spec out from the way it was supposed to be playing. Remember in Mist of Pandaria the Taste of Blood, the original Taste of Blood effect, which made your heroic strike hit like a nuclear bomb, and then you had to be bailed out in Worlds of Draenor with the tier 18 bonus, the 30% chance on your slam to reset the cooldown of Mortar Strike, and Tactical Surge to make your auto attacks have a chance to give you Colossus Smash. And then in Legion you have gotten Focused Rage. Every time there had to be something somewhere in the middle of the expansion to basically pull out Arms of this supposedly niche and very thematic, slow but hard-hitting rotation, which turned out to be pretty bad most of the time. Even in BFA, that you have just going through, this reworked mastery where it was supposed to keep up your damage in between your high damage ability windows turned out to be a terrible system where 50% of your damage came from a DOT in the background, and it was terrible. It was not a good feeling to have so much of your damage be taken over by a DOT that you don't even do directly. And unfortunately, Shadowlands doesn't appear to change anything in regards to this design intent. While we have some improvements in the defense and the utility, there simply isn't any, strong class fantasy represented in the toolkit. Despite the very nice changes to your utility and your toolkit, as well as some of the talents and the abilities reworked a little bit, you can essentially still just remove your Azerite traits in BFA and be playing a Shadowlands Arms Warrior, because it's been the same. It will be the same. Going over the good things, as I mentioned, you have gotten things like Spell Reflection, things like Ignore Pain baseline, things like Shattering Throw coming back for the shield break. Ignore Pain is very good defensive. Yes, it's gonna cost rage, it's gonna cost you DPS, but it's still a good defensive. And then of course Spell Reflection. Some of your talents have been changed here and there, but of course the particular big change is going to be your mastery. Your mastery now, rather than being this old DOT which did most of your damage, now Deep Wounds is going to be doing substantially less damage while instead making everything else deal more. Debuffing the enemies so that you hit them for more. This is good because now it's your abilities that are going to be carrying you in your damage and not your DOT. Most of the other changes were very, very minor. The problem on these changes being very, very minor is the fact that the talent tree of Arms has always been quite poor, and these changes do not fix it in any way. Starting from the most important ones at the bottom, the level 45 and the level 50 row. In for the Kill and Anger Management are still by far the strongest two talents in that row, and not enough has been done to empower the other options. Dreadnought has gotten the Azerite trait Seismic Wave cooked into it, and Ravager has gotten its cooldown reduced. Deadly Calm also is going to reduce the rage cost of your next 4 abilities and increase your maximum rage, but none of this can make up for the effects of In for the Kill and the haste gain, as well as Anger Management and the city reduction on your Warbreaker and Bladestorm. My personal opinion, Anger Management should have just become baseline and freed you up of a spot. Same for In for the Kill, should have been a baseline ability, a baseline effect on your Warbreaker and Colossus Smash, and just freed up those 2 rows of something else, because right now they are way too oppressive. The rest of the talent tree is still pretty poor. Things like Collateral Damage, things like War Machine, they're not that good, they're not that interesting. You have only a few options between Warbreaker and Cleave if you want the burst to match up with your Bladestorm in Warbreaker, or if you want the sustained cleave damage, you can go for Sudden Death if you're playing around Execute phase and Execute damage, especially if you have, for example, your Ventir Covenant, or if you're using one of the legendaries that synergizes with Execute, or you can simply take Skull Splitter, which even when you take it, it's a very boring ability. Just remember to click it once every 20 seconds, line it up with Warbreaker for the extra damage, but that's about it. The only good talent row, the only good amount of option that you can see in the Warrior talent tree is going to be the level 30. Massacre, Feather of Battle, and Rend. Rend is a very good single target, but also 2 to 3 target cleave ability that you can keep up. Feather of Battle is a good priority damage and AoE ability, which still allows you to focus on your primary target with your slam. And then you have Massacre, which is of course compounding on your strength, on your elite feature, which is Execute damage. This is a good example of a good talent throw system. The rest of the tree for arms is pretty poor. The problems of arms. A lot of these changes don't really have a profound impact on the gameplay itself. If you're not a fan of arms now, if you're not a fan of arms in the beta, the pre-patch, whatever, then you're not going to be playing arms in Shadowlands, because not enough has changed. Rounding up these changes, there haven't been enough changes to have a profound impact on the gameplay itself, on your rotation, on your toolkit, when it comes to damage dealing. The rotation is still going to be around keeping your Mortar Strike and Overpower on cooldown as long as you can, as often as you can, while using Colossus Smash tied with Blaze Storm once every other CD, since Colossus Smash has half the CD of Blaze Storm, on cooldown when you can, and then filling up the empty GCDs of your Mortar Strike and Overpower being on cooldown and your Colossus Smash and Blaze Storm being on cooldown with whatever you have left. Slam and Rend if you're playing with Rend, or just Whirlwind if you're playing with Fervor of Battle. Skull Splitter on cooldown every 20-ish seconds if you're playing with Skull Splitter. And then just wait for your Mortar Strike, Overpower, Mortar Strike, Overpower, Overpower buffing your Mortar Strike damage. And every 45 seconds you can Warbreaker, every 90 seconds you can Warbreaker Blaze Storm. Realistically, since you're playing Anger Management, the time is closer to every 30 seconds, every 25 seconds because of the cooldown reduction, but the rotation remains exactly the same. And the problem is that coming into Shadowlands you don't have anything even remotely close to the Test of Might trait. Anything that can give you, you know, a big ending, a big finisher. You're pretty barren right now, you're pretty empty of effects, because when you go and look at the legendaries are good, the legendaries have nice effects, some of them can change your rotation to, you know, make it more enjoyable, but it's still not enough. Enduring Blow is going to make your Mortar Strike have a chance to apply Colossus Smash on the target, which is just going to be flat out more damage, doesn't have much interaction with your kit. Exploiter is going to make your Execute buff your Mortar Strike damage up to 2 times. Again, if you're taking Massacre, if you're taking Sudden Death, this is the legendary you want, synergize with it. And then the more important one is going to be Battle Lord, giving your Slam a 40% chance to reset the cooldown of Mortar Strike, as well as reducing the rage cost. This is very, very good as a legendary to change your rotation, to shake it up a little bit, to make your Mortar Strike way more valuable. However, as you see, nothing groundbreaking. At the very best, you're going to be pressing Mortar Strike a few more times. So in the end, you can say that when we look at the spec as a whole, remaining very, very similar to BFA, not many changes, we can see that Arms is going to stay pretty strong in its niche, okay? Very important to highlight this part. They will remain a strong single target spec, they will remain a very strong, in fact, one of the strongest execute phase specs. They will have a very clear niche and a very clear strong point. This means you also have to acknowledge and, you know, deal with its weaknesses. Okay, because Arms Warrior has essentially very, very, very poor AoE and very, very, very poor cleave. They have near to no burst because they have near to no cooldowns. The only cooldown they have is Blaze Storm, and it's a poor one. It's extremely poor in single target, it's okay in AoE, but for a 90-second cooldown it's not that good. You can't even follow up Blaze Storm with anything else. You have Sweeping Strikes for a 2-target cleave, which is actually similar to Havoc for Destruction. The difference is that Destruction can pull up their energy, pull up their soul shards, and then spam Chaos Bolts. You cannot do that as Arms, because you have very little burst. And then your AoE is extremely poor. Outside of your Warbreaker and Blaze Storm, you have nothing else. So you have to recognize the weaknesses of Arms when you play it, on top of, you know, being okay with the strengths. Because this is why I always mentioned Arms Warrior being, you know, more of a boomer spec. They are a spec that has been very slow, one of the slowest APM specs, one of the slowest, essentially, buttons per minute pressed spec. Before we started getting into this last tier of BFA with corruptions, stereotypically a very slow spec, few abilities, few buttons to press, very few things to keep track of in terms of debuffs and buffs, basically no rotation, just a priority system, not losing too much DPS if they messed up one of their abilities instead of the other. You know, it is a more simple spec. You can enjoy it, it still has its high enjoyment points. I think Mortar Strike feels very nice to use, so does Warbreaker, so does Blaze Storm, and then of course you have the execute window with your extra haste. It still feels very nice, but you know, it's not for everyone. It's a more niche spec, and it hasn't changed in Shadowlands, which is why I mentioned before, if you didn't like Arms before, you are not gonna like it now. If you were interested in Arms before, or if you already played Arms before and you thought it was nice, then it's gonna be the same. Just similar to every single other spec in the game, you have to account for the loss of borrowed powers that will happen in Shadowlands. So That's not just unique to ARMS, the loss of Test of Might and Memory of Lucid Dreams and massive amount of power. That's gonna be for everyone else. With this cautionary tale about ARMS Warrior, I am done. We're gonna be looking at another range DPS spec after this. This is going to be a more diverse one, we can say, now that we've gone through ARMS. So, how many boomers in the chat interested in playing ARMS? Please let me know. And with this, I can take my leave. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I'm off.